I love my time at Northwestern. It was great. It was definitely a launching point for me for my whole career. It was an environment that encouraged you to learn a lot, both in the classroom and out of the classroom, intern a lot, do all of that stuff, and that definitely helped me. I did a print student when I was here. I did teaching newspaper at a paper in Fort Lauderdale, and back then they didn't let you specialize for TN or anything like that, so I spent a good 6 months ahead of time lobbying to get to do a sports internship. That was a great experience. I got to work with a lot of real pros and interned at the Washington Post just as a summer internship after that. And then when it was time to graduate from Northwestern, my TN paper, the Sun Sentinel, offered me a full-time job. So I can say without, there's a straight line that going to school here is what led to my first job. And I was there for about a year. And then the Washington Post, and I grew up around Washington, D.C., the Washington Post offered me a job about a year after that. So I did that for 8 years, and I'd always done some TV on the side. And I was sort of lucky enough to come up in the business in a time where that crossover from print to DV was just kind of starting. So I just switched over to TV entirely. And that's what I do now for ESPN. I've been there for, I want to say 8 or 9 years, probably more years than I should admit to. And really love it a lot, and it's fun to come back here and do stuff. It's a big country out there. There's a lot of teams. There's a lot of people you got to manage if you work for a national publication. Cover the Miami Dolphins, cover the Washington Capitals. And that's where you learn by going into the same locker room every day, same practices, that kind of thing. Gives you the grounding for later when you have to stretch that among 32 teams across the NFL and all the NBA teams and et cetera, that you can have that, just it's reflexive then at that point, and it takes time. You know, LeBron James is someone who I interview a lot and spend time with, and I've had people say, oh, how'd you get that LeBron James interview, as if it sort of came in a cereal box or something. And it's like, well, no, I've covered him since he was in high school. So we've been talking to each other since he was in high school. It's 9 years of conversations. When I walked in to this job, I mean, how lucky was I that all those women came first to be able to just get someone to give me a shot, because that's what made that happen. So you can't even compare to what it used to be. But it's not perfect. And there's a combination. There's people who don't want to give you credit for knowing stuff. There's people who, you know, athletes, when they talk to you on a real surface level, because they're like, oh, she doesn't really understand, you know, and then you have to keep coming back. And by the fourth time that you have a conversation about something, and they're like, oh. I've actually had a lot of athletes be like, you know what you're talking about? And I'm like, because I do this for a living, you know, but it happens, and you get, if people haven't been exposed to women who know that kind of stuff, then maybe it takes a while. I don't find it hard not to cross that line. I don't go out for dinners with people. I don't go out for drinks with athletes. I don't socialize in that way for a couple reasons. I think no matter who you are, it's dangerous. It just kind of, there's people who do it, and there's people who get a ton from it, and if they can handle that balance, that's great. But I think especially for a woman, and just in general, just coming from the real strict journalism, Northwestern, you know, you're this and they're this, and you got to keep separation. There's a lot of people out there who follow sports. So if you're going to be an expert, you got to know more than them. You got to know more than the guy who reads every website every morning and who goes home and watches SportsCenter all night. You got to be better than that. You got to know more than that, because they're getting their news from you. So whether you're male or female, it's important. And then, yeah, especially if you're female, if you're someone for any reason people aren't inclined to give a shot to, you got to surprise them every time with how good you are. It's tough sometimes to get people to open up. It's, you know, we call hostile interview. There's people who are doing something because their PR person told them to do it, or they're doing something because their coach told them they had to, or they're doing something and they have an agenda, and your job is to get something out of them that's a different agenda. But that's about being prepared, having a smart line of questioning, really setting up your interview. I think it's better to work in some other form of journalism than work at Starbucks if you can't find a sports job, because that will help you get into the next sports job. But you know, in general, you should keep fighting. And this is easier said than done, of course, but you should keep fighting to do what you want to do, because, I don't know, what you cover is such an important part of whether you like your job if you're a journalist. You have to be interested in the subject matter. You have to be actually curious about it. You don't need to be all things to all people, because as you point out, there's a lot there, and even within ESPN, there's a lot there. I've been covering a lot with the Jeremy Lin story in New York. I'm there for SportsCenter. We have ESPNNewYork.com that has a columnist and a beat writer there. ESPN the magazine has someone there doing a magazine story. So I don't have to cover every angle on the story. I just have to think about what works for a SportsCenter audience and a 2-minute package for the end of the night on that thing, and deliver that the best that I can. And then there will be people like the New Yorker writing a different kind of piece. You won't see them hammering a story over and over again for a long period of time if there isn't a reason, if it doesn't rate well. People used to say to me about Brett Favre, well, why do you guys cover Brett Favre so much? Because every time we put him on SportsCenter, the ratings would spike up. People wanted to know about Brett Favre, and they would stick around in front of their TV for longer, and they'd sit through the advertisements, and then they'd watch Brett Favre. And Tim Tebow and Jeremy Lin are the same thing. I like them both. I like doing the mix of it. There's stuff about long form that's great. Lets you really dig into a subject, see a story develop in a way that you don't with the daily grind of SportsCenter. There's stories I've done for E60 where we'll check in on someone in January, back with them in March, back with them in August, and then finally air the story in the fall. Just telling a good story. And it's funny, people sometimes don't think of live shots in that way, but that's what that is also. And you know, sometimes a beginning, middle, and an end can be 10 seconds. You know, if you think of like a good 15-second commercial that you've seen, they have a beginning, middle, and end. It kind of depends on the story and what you want to talk about. So you just did Jeremy Lin, sat down with Jeremy Lin this weekend. And for me, going into that interview, I was feeling just sort of, okay, how do I wanted to get it right, because first of all, he's just not doing a lot of media. It's kind of crazy when you think about what he's turned down. He just turned down on the cover of GQ. He's turned down like every morning show, every whatever. So if I was getting one of the few opportunities to talk to him, I really wanted to get it right. And one thing that I wanted to do going into the interview is that we had 12 days of Jeremy Lin, the phenomenon. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about Linsanity and all of that, but I really wanted to spend the bulk of the interview drawing out who he was as a person. As I was going through my print career, I started doing more and more of that. So I was doing some guest stuff for CNN, which I think put me a little bit on the national map. And then I started doing some freelance pieces for ESPN on Outside the Lines. So they got a chance to sort of see what I was like to actually work with. Sort of had a weird confluence of events job-wise, where got the offer to work full-time for ESPN and got an offer to work full-time for the New York Times at the same time. So it was a real division in the road of, do I want to stay at the Washington Post, do I want to go to the New York Times, do I want to go to ESPN? And it's three very different career paths would have led me in 3 very different directions. And for me, it was a little bit the opportunity to do something I hadn't done yet. I was on an airplane, and I was actually the first. It was the shuttle between New York and Washington, so it was just all seats, no like first class or anything like that. And I was actually in the first row, and it was a 3-seat across, and the 2 seats next to me were empty, and the plane was packed. And then like the reason that they were holding the door open is that those 2 seats were being held for Muhammad Ali and his wife. And they came and they sat down, and I was like, so finally, like 10 minutes in, I was like, seriously, I couldn't speak for 10 minutes, and then finally I'm like, hi, I cover sports kind of, and hi, and whatever, and then it was phenomenal. It really depends. At ESPN, we write most of our own stuff. Now there are some reporters who don't really have a background in writing and don't write very well. So you see the producers kind of pitch to make that easier or better, or do a little bit of the there are some shows, though, that are we call them producer-driven shows. We don't really have them at ESPN as much, but although E60, the producers do a tremendous amount of work at E60, and then the writing's shared. People always say, you know, what's your one piece of advice, that kind of thing. And I always say something which is boring, but I really think makes a big difference, which is to intern. You guys are in an awesome position being in school. People will give you the benefit of the doubt. They will give you the benefit of internships. There's a bunch of internships that are created just for students. So the more internships you can get while you're in school, the more stuff you can get on your tape if you're in video, the more clips you can get in your clip pack if you're in print, shows people that you can do this job, gets you advocates, gets you a taste of what you might want to do. Use this degree, which is going to help you more than you probably realize from the professors who drive you crazy, and really, really intern. Use the fact that you're a Northwestern student, which carries a ton of credibility in newsrooms around the country. Thank you, guys.